The world was ending in a roar of celebration, and I was the only one who could hear the silence at its heart. My name is Alara. For 22 years, I have been a ghost in the House of Ironclaw, a human whisper among wolves who celebrate their victories with bone-cracking revelry. That night, the great hall of Blackstone Keep was a living, breathing beast of sound and fury. They roared for their king, for the blood he had spilled in the northern wars. They roared and they drank, and they did not see the death being poured into their king's cup right before their eyes. I held the decanter, my fingers white-knuckled against the crystal. It wasn't fear that made me tremble, not exactly. It was the memory of a scent, bitter almonds and crushed wolfsbane clinging to my mother's cold hand, a scent I now smelled weaving through the rich, dark wine in this vessel. My mother had been a poison tester for the pack's enemies. Her final gift to me and her last rasping breath was the knowledge of how death smelled. And this wine for the victorious Alpha King, Kalen Blackwood, reeked of it. He sat at the head of the table like a mountain carved from shadow and storm. Kalen Blackwood, the unbroken king. His dark hair fell across a face that was both brutally beautiful and terrifyingly cold. He was listening to his warlord, Rorik, recount a battle, his fingers drumming a rhythm that vibrated through the very stone floor. Power radiated from him in waves, so potent it stole the air from my lungs. Beta Jax, a wolf with eyes the color of old amber, shoved me forward. "Move, girl. The king's cup is empty. Don't keep him waiting." 60 seconds. That's what I had. 60 seconds between the poison touching his lips and his heart seizing forever. If he died, the pack would shatter. They would blame the northern clans, and a war would ignite that would burn through the territories, consuming human villages like mine in its path. We were always the first kindling. My village was ashes because of a pack war. I was 12. I remembered the screams, the fire, the sound of wolves laughing. I carried that silence with me, a hollow space where my childhood had been. I reached the high table. The king did not look at me. Why would he? I was furniture. I was air. "Your Majesty," I whispered, the words lost in the din. I lifted the decanter. The wine, the color of a deep, fatal wound, glugged into his goblet. It rose, dark and deadly. 1 heartbeat. 2. If he drinks, thousands die. If I stop him, I die. No human touches the Alpha King and lives. My mother's voice echoed from the grave. Sometimes, Alara, true strength isn't in surviving. It's in choosing who else gets to live. On the 3rd heartbeat, I chose. My wrist jerked, not a clumsy stumble, but a deliberate, sharp motion. The crystal goblet flew from the table. It seemed to hang in the air for a lifetime, a droplet of ruby poison catching the firelight before it shattered against Kalen Blackwood's chest. The sound was catastrophic, not just the glass breaking, but the absolute, deafening silence that followed. The roar of the hall cut off as if severed by a blade. Every wolf froze. Every eye, yellow and gray and blue, turned and pinned me to the spot. I stumbled back, the empty decanter slipping from my fingers to join its brother in destruction on the flagstones. The king rose, slowly. Wine dripped from the dark silk of his tunic, spreading like a bloodstain over his heart. The air grew thick, heavy with the promise of violence. He turned his head, and for the first time in my life, the Alpha King truly saw me. His eyes were the color of a winter sky before a blizzard, ancient and merciless. He growled, the word vibrating in my bones. "What did you just do?" I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only watch as the poison, splashed on his skin and already seeping into his system, began its work. His pupils dilated strangely. His hand, large and scarred, flew to his chest, fingers curling into a claw over his heart. A sharp, wet gasp tore from his throat. His knees buckled. "The king!" Warlord Rorik lunged, catching Kalen before he hit the ground. Chaos is a living thing that erupts, snarls, shouts, the shriek of steel being drawn, but my eyes were locked with the king's. And in his storm-gray gaze, as pain and confusion ripped through him, I saw a lightning bolt of pure, stunning realization. He knew. Beta Jax's hand was around my throat in an instant, slamming me against the cold stone wall. My vision spotted. "Treasonous human filth," he roared, spittle hitting my face. "I'll peel the skin from your bones." "No!" The command did not come from Jax. It came from the center of the chaos, raw but absolute. Kalen Blackwood shoved himself upright in Rorik's arms, his face pale but his eyes burning. "She spilled it." Jax's grip loosened in confusion. "My king?" Kalen pushed Rorik away, standing on trembling legs. Whatever was in the wine, his supernatural metabolism was fighting it, burning it away. But it had been a near thing, a very near thing. He never looked away from me. "She spilled the wine before I could drink." The implication dropped into the silent hall like a stone into a still pond. Ripples of shock spread through the pack. "Impossible," a voice muttered. "A human wouldn't dare." "Bring me the decanter." Kalen's voice gaining strength, layered with a dangerous subterranean rumble. "What's left of it?" Shards of crystal were gathered. The dregs of wine pooled like a dark, guilty secret. Kalen crouched, inhaling deeply. His entire body went rigid. When he looked up, his face was a mask of cold fury. Wolfsbane, nightshade, shadowroot, a blend to stop a heart in 3 minutes. He moved toward me, and the wolves holding me forced me to my knees before him. He crouched again, bringing us eye level. The scent of him, cedar, iron, and stormwind, was overwhelming. "How did you know?" I could lie. I should lie. But lies were for the living, and I was already dead. Only truth might buy a moment more. "I," rasped my throat bruised. "My mother, she tested poisons for your enemies. I learned the sense." "Who poisoned the wine?" "I don't know. But before she died, she told me the poison wasn't just to kill a king. It was to start a war, to break the pack so the northern clans could sweep in and pick us apart." Kalen's hand shot out, gripping my chin. His touch was searing hot, almost painful, but beneath the heat, something flickered. A strange staticky sensation, like two opposing forces meeting and canceling out. It made his eyes widen just for a fraction of a second. "You're lying," he said, but it sounded like a question. "I'm not," I whispered, holding his stormy gaze. "Kill me, but the traitor is here, in this hall, and they will try again." He studied my face as if reading runes carved into my soul. The pack held its breath, a collective beast waiting to pounce. Finally, he released me and stood. "Chain her," he commanded. "In my tower." Gasps hissed through the room. Beta Jax stepped forward, outraged. "My king, protocol demands execution. A human who touches—" "She saved my life." Kalen's voice was final, colder than the stone beneath us. "And she knows who wants me dead. Until I find the traitor, she stays alive. Anyone who touches her answers to me." His rough hands hauled me up, and cold, silver-laced iron was clamped around my wrists. I caught Kalen's gaze one last time. And in those ancient, stormy depths, I saw the question that would now bind our fates together. A question that terrified me more than any poison. What are you? Because no ordinary human should have felt that strange, quieting spark at his touch, and we both knew it. The chains were a cold, heavy reality. Silver-laced iron designed to burn and weaken a wolf's essence. On my human skin, they were just cold. A brutal reminder that I had traded a quick death for a slow, uncertain captivity. The guards, wolves with stony faces and distrustful eyes, marched me through corridors I had only ever cleaned. We ascended a spiraling staircase carved into the heart of Blackstone Keep, each step taking me further from the world I knew and deeper into the domain of the king. Kalen's tower was not a prison cell. It was a realm of shadows and moonlight. The chamber was vast, hewn from the same dark granite as the rest of the keep, but here immense windows arced open to the night sky. A fire crackled in a hearth large enough to roast an ox, its light dancing over fur rugs, shelves of ancient-looking books, and a massive oak desk strewn with maps and scrolls. It smelt of him, of cedar smoke, old parchment, and that peculiar, clean scent of a storm on the wind. They shoved me inside. The heavy oak door thudded shut, and the sound of a heavy bar sliding into place echoed with finality. I was alone. The silence was immense, broken only by the pop of the fire and the frantic hammering of my own heart. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, sliding down until I sat on the floor, drawing my knees to my chest. The chains clinked, a mournful sound. Why was I alive? It made no sense. Pack law was clear, brutal, and absolute. A human who raised a hand to the alpha forfeited their life. Not just forfeited, it was to be a public, gruesome example. Yet he had spared me. His words echoed. She saved my life. But that wasn't enough. Kings did not spare insects out of gratitude. There was something else. That look in his eyes. That feeling when he touched me. An hour bled by, measured in the slow crawl of fire shadows across the floor. I was adrift in a sea of what-ifs and terror when the door opened again. He entered like the quiet after a thunderclap. Kalen Blackwood had changed from his wine-stained finery into simple, dark trousers and a gray tunic that did nothing to soften the sheer, predatory power of him. He was all coiled strength and silent command. He closed the door and leaned against it, his storm-gray eyes finding me in the shadows by the wall. He didn't speak. He just watched. The intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. "Your Majesty," I whispered automatically, dropping my eyes. It was ingrained. Humans did not meet a wolf stare. It was a challenge. It was suicide. "Look at me." The command was soft, but it vibrated in my teeth. Slowly, I forced my head up. My gaze climbed over Boots, past the lean strength of his frame, to finally meet his eyes. They were not angry. They were deeply, profoundly curious. "Tell me about your mother," he said. No preamble, no threat, just a quiet, relentless demand for truth. The chains clinked as I shifted. "Her name was Isolde. She worked in the kitchens. Before the pack's enemies found a use for her." "What use?" "Access." The word tasted bitter. "Humans are invisible here. We are ghosts who carry trays and scrub floors. We don't register as threats. So when the northern clans needed someone to test their poisons, to learn what could kill a wolf, they took her. For 2 years they would come. They'd force her to taste compounds, to document the effects. Most nights she barely survived." Something flickered in Kalen's expression. Not pity, something sharper. Recognition. A warrior understanding another's battlefield. "And you taught." "She made me," I corrected, a hollow laugh escaping. "Before the last fever took her, she drilled every scent, every symptom, every antidote into my skull. She said it was the only inheritance she could leave me, a library of death in my mind." I looked at my chained hands. Tonight, it was the only thing that stood between you and a grave. Kalen pushed off the door and walked towards me. Each step was deliberate, measured. He stopped a few feet away, then did the unthinkable. He crouched down, bringing himself to my level, the alpha king on his haunches before a human chained servant. The world had truly gone mad. "The poison tonight," he said, his voice low. "You identified 3 complex compounds in seconds, in a crowded hall, while terrified." His eyes searched mine. "That's not just memory, Alara. That's a skill honed to a weapon's edge." Hearing my name from his lips was a shock. It was intimate. Wrong. He shouldn't know it. I was the girl or the servant, never Alara. I didn't have a choice, I breathed. If you had died, the pack would have splintered, war would have come. And in that war, my people die first. We are the kindling. I was 12 when the last border war burned my village to the ground. I watched wolves tear through it like it was a game. So yes, Your Majesty, I care if wolves go to war. I know exactly what it costs. The silence that followed was thick, charged with things unsaid. He was so close I could see the individual silver threads in his gray irises, the faint scar that bisected his left eyebrow. He was studying me as if I were one of the strange maps on his desk, a territory uncharted. Then he moved. His hands went to the manacles around my wrists. There was a click, and the cold iron fell away, clattering to the stone floor. The sudden absence of weight was dizzying. I stared at the discarded chains, then at him. I don't understand. You're not a prisoner, he said, standing. You are a witness, and possibly the only reason my heart is still beating. He turned and walked to the window, gazing out at the moon-drenched mountains. Someone in my inner circle tried to kill me tonight, someone I trust, someone who knew I would drink from my own decanter without a second thought. My beta, Jax, Warlord Rorik, they have been my brothers since we were pups. Rorik took a blade meant for me in the Northern Wars. He turned fully, his expression grim. But someone close enough to access the royal cellars, smart enough to use a subtle poison, bold enough to strike during a victory feast, that's not a hired knife, that's family. The word hung in the air, heavy with the taste of betrayal. I pushed myself to feet, my legs shaky. What do you need from me? Information. Any names your mother might have let slip? Any patterns? Anything? He took a step closer. And I need your senses. If they try again, and they will, you might be the only one who can stop it. You want me to be your poison taster? The laugh that escaped me was sharp, brittle. That's what got my mother killed. No. He closed the distance between us in 2 strides. Suddenly, his presence was everywhere, a wall of heat and intensity. His voice dropped, laced with a confusion that mirrored my own. When I spilled that wine, and when I touched you in the hall, something happened. My breath hitched. What do you mean? His hand came up, hovering near the side of my face, not touching, but I could feel the warmth of his skin. When I gripped your chin, I felt a disconnection, like a static shock that drained the room of sound. My wolf, he hesitated, struggling for words. My wolf went quiet. It shouldn't be possible. Human touch doesn't affect us like that. Oh no. My blood ran cold. He had felt it, that strange, neutralizing blankness. My mother's dying warning screamed in my memory. You're different, my heart. Promise me you'll hide it. Promise me they'll never know what you are. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, taking a deliberate step back. The lie tasted like ash. His eyes narrowed, the storm in them gathering. Yes, you do. Before he could press further, the door shuddered under a heavy fist, then burst open. Beta Jack stood there, his face a mask of grim urgency, but his yellow eyes, when they landed on me, held a venom that hadn't been there before. My king, he said, voice tight. We have a problem. The pack is gathering. They're demanding her execution. They say pack law's clear, and your mercy makes you look weak. Kaylen's face hardened. Tell them the investigation is not finished. It's more than that. Jack stepped fully into the room, holding out a folded piece of parchment. The wax seal was broken, but I could see the emblem, a stark, gray mountain peak. The sigil of the northern clans. We searched the servant quarters, her mother's old trunk. His gaze cut to me, triumphant and cold. We found this. Letters, detailed instructions on destabilizing wolf hierarchies through biological agents, instructions signed by her mother's hand. The floor dropped out from under me. That's impossible. My mother would never. Wouldn't she? Jax's smile was a cruel slash. To save her own skin? Or perhaps, he looked pointedly at Kaylin, to ensure her daughter was perfectly placed to finish the job? The accusation was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I looked at Kaylin, desperate for disbelief, but I saw only a cold, calculating stillness as he took the letter. He read it in silence, his expression giving nothing away. Each second was an eternity, a nail being hammered into my coffin. Finally, he lowered the parchment. "Leave us, Jax. My king, now." Jax left, but the look he gave me promised that this was only a reprieve, not a pardon. When the door shut, the silence was suffocating. Kaylin held up the damning letter. "Explain this." I couldn't. The handwriting was my mother's. The seal was real. A terrible, yawning doubt opened inside me. Had I been a fool? Had everything I believed about her sacrifice been a lie? Was I, not a reluctant savior, but a planted weapon, now activated? Then my eyes, trained by a mother who knew forgery was a survival skill, I caught it. A tiny detail. A flaw. "She didn't write that willingly," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "How do you know?" I stepped forward, pointing a shaking finger. "The signature, the I in I sold. See the loop? It's too perfect. My mother's hand shook after the poisons. Her eye always had a slight tremor, a break in the curve here." I looked up at him, imploring. "This is too clean. And she was left-handed. This was written with the right hand. Someone made her write this. They wanted her confession, but they didn't know her." Kaylin studied the parchment again, his brow furrowed. "You learned to spot forgeries, too." "I learned to spot lies," I whispered. "When you're human in a wolf's world, it's the only armor you have." He stared at the letter, then at me. The conflict in his eyes a war I couldn't read. The evidence said one thing, my conviction said another, and beneath it all, thrumming between us, was that impossible, quieting spark he'd felt, the spark that made me either a miracle or a monster. A commotion erupted from far below, shouts, the sound of splintering wood. Kaylin's head snapped toward the door. "Stay here," he commanded, already moving. "What's happening?" "My pack," he said, his voice grim, "is choosing sides." He was gone before I could respond, the door closing behind him. But I didn't stay. I couldn't. This was my life, my truth, unraveling. I followed, my bare feet silent on the cold stone steps, descending back toward the gathering storm. The great hall had transformed. The festive tables were overturned, their ruins pushed against the walls. In their place stood a ring of wolves, their faces etched with suspicion, fear, and naked bloodlust. The air crackled with the promise of violence, a thick, musky scent of aggression that made my human senses recoil. I hovered in the shadow of the archway, unseen. Kaylin stood at the center of the storm, his back straight, his presence a dam holding back a tide of rage. "Treason!" a barrel-chested warrior roared, slamming a fist against a broken table. "The human lives, we all die. The law is clear." "The Alpha King spared her," Warlord Rorik countered, his scarred face set in stubborn lines. He stood slightly apart from the crowd, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Would you question his judgment now, after he led us to victory in the north?" "I question his senses." Beta Jax's voice cut through the din. He stepped into the open space, his yellow eyes sweeping the crowd. "She is human. They are weak. They are deceitful. They have been our servants, our pets, but never our equals. This," he gestured wildly in my direction, and I shrank back. "This is madness. She touches the king and lives? She is accused and she is protected. What hold does she have?" The murmurs grew, a dangerous undercurrent of agreement. "She saved my life." Kaylin's voice was a low growl that silenced the room. "Or would you rather I had drunk that poison? Would you rather be leaderless now with our enemies at the gates?" "We don't know she saved you." The new voice was female, sharp as a blade. Liana, one of the pack's elite trackers, stepped forward. Her silver-streaked hair was braided tightly, her gaze accusing. Perhaps she poisoned the wine herself, spilled it to look the hero, to get close to you, to finish the job when your guard is down. Kaelin's power rolled outwards, a pressure that made several wolves take an involuntary step back. To what end, Lyanna? What does a human gain from my death but her own? Access. The word slithered from the shadows near the massive fireplace. A figure detached itself from the darkness and stepped into the firelight. He was tall, lean where Kaelin was broad, dressed in traveling clothes of fine, dark leather. His hair was the color of polished ash, and his eyes were the pale, chilling amber of a winter sunrise. Everything about him radiated a calculated, intelligent danger. This was not the raw, elemental force of Kaelin. This was a surgeon's knife, cold and precise. Alpha Silas, Kaelin said, and I heard a note of surprise, tightly controlled. I was not aware you had arrived. I came as soon as the whispers reached my territory, Silas said, his voice smooth as oiled silk. His amber gaze slid past Kaelin and found me in the shadows. It felt like being pinned by a predator who had already decided I was prey. Fascinating. A human servant identifies a poison that eluded your best warriors, saves the Alpha King, is rewarded not with death, but with chains in his private tower? He tilted his head, a mockery of curiosity. Forgive me, Kaelin, but it reads like a poorly written ballad, and we all know how those tales end for the foolish king. What are you implying? Kaelin's voice had dropped to a sub-audible rumble. I am implying we are looking at this backwards. Silas began to slowly circle the open space, his movements graceful, predatory. What if the poison was never meant to kill you? What if it was meant to make you sick, to make you need saving? He stopped, his gaze locking onto me again, and a cold dread pooled in my stomach. To create dependence, to place a weapon of unknown capability right at your side, in your confidence, in your chambers. The accusation was a masterstroke. It reframed everything. My courage became manipulation. My survival became a plot. Gasps and snarls echoed in the hall. That's insane! The protest burst from me before I could stop it. I stepped out of the shadows, unable to bear the lie in silence. Every wolf in the room turned to stare. Silas's smile was a thin, cruel line. Is it? Your mother worked for the northern clans. You admit to poison training. You perform a miraculous public rescue. Now you are in his confidence. He spread his hands. The stage is set. The only question is when the final act begins. I would never. Prove it. The two words fell into the silence like stones. Silas gestured to a wolf by the door, who hurried forward with a small, corked vial. Inside, a few drops of dark liquid sloshed, the dregs from the shattered decanter. Drink it. The world narrowed to that vial. My blood turned to ice. A few drops, Silas continued, his voice deceptively gentle. The poison was brewed for wolf metabolism. For a human, it will be unpleasant, sickening, but not lethal. Unless, of course, you have already taken an antidote. Unless you know something we do not. It was a perfect, elegant trap. Refuse, and I was guilty. Drink and die, I was innocent but dead. Drink and survive too easily, they would know. They would know I was not what I seemed. Kaelin's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Wait. His touch was searing, and that strange, quieting spark flared between us, stronger this time. A static hush. His eyes widened slightly. He felt it too. Let her drink, my king, Jax urged, his voice dripping with false concern. Let her prove her loyalty to the pack. Kaelin's grip tightened, his gaze searching mine, a silent war raging in his stormy eyes. I saw fear there, not for himself, but for me, for what this might reveal. Finally, his fingers uncurled. He released me. The message was clear. The choice was mine, and there was only one choice. I took the vial. The glass was cold. I uncorked it. The scent of wolfsbane and nightshade, of my mother's suffering and my own terror filled my nose. I did not look at Kaelin. I looked at Silas, at his triumphant amber eyes, and I drank. Fire. It was liquid fire and ground glass tearing down my throat. I choked, my body convulsing, rejecting the vile invader. I stumbled, my vision blurring at the edges, tunneling to a pinpoint of pain. Agony detonated in my chest, a vice clamping around my heart. This is it. I'm wrong. I'm just human and I'm dying. Then Kalen was there. His arms closed around me as my knees gave way, catching me before I hit the stone. The moment his skin made contact with mine, the pain stopped. Not lessened, not faded, stopped. The inferno in my veins was extinguished, the vice on my heart released, my vision cleared, my ragged breathing steadied. The poison that should have been ravaging my system was simply gone, neutralized, as if it had never been. I was still in Kalen's arms, trembling, but whole, alive. And from the dead, stunned silence that gripped the great hall, I knew everyone had seen the impossible. "What magic is this?" someone whispered, terror in their voice. "Impossible," Silas breathed, his smooth composure shattered for a single, revealing instant. His amber eyes were wide with shock and something else, a voracious, hungry curiosity. Kalen helped me stand, his arm a solid band around my waist. I could feel the tension singing through him. "She used a hidden antidote," Jack snarls, recovering first. "Search her, find the vial." "Enough." Kalen's voice was the crack of a glacier splitting. He did not shout, but the word carried the full, crushing weight of his alpha will. The wolves who had stepped forward froze. "No one touches her, not until I understand what just happened." Warlord Rorit stepped forward, his face grave. "My king, we all saw it. The compounds in that wine are lethal to any warm-blooded creature, human or wolf. Yet she stands." "Perhaps she built an immunity," Liana suggested, though her tone was doubtful. "Her mother forced her to taste poisons." "Immunity does not work that fast," Silas interrupted, his composure back in place, smoother than ever. His eyes were fixed on me like a collector beholding a rare, dangerous specimen. "What we witnessed defies nature, unless—" He let the word hang, poisonously. "Unless she is not what she claims to be." The unspoken word filled the hall. Abomination, monster, threat. Kalen moved, placing himself squarely between Silas and me. "Everyone out. Now." "You cannot be serious," Jax exploded. "You will stay alone with this thing after what we just saw?" "Out." The command was alpha power made sound, a wave of force that had wolves stumbling back, their heads bowing in instinctive submission. "That includes you, Silas. Your theories can wait." Silas inclined his head, a mocking gesture of deference. "Of course, Alpha King, though I wonder, when you are alone with her, can you be certain your judgment is your own? Wolves have been compromised by lesser attractions." He turned and glided from the hall, with Jax and the others filing after him, casting backward glances of fear and fury. The door thudded shut. We were alone in the wreckage of the feast, the silence louder than any roar. Kalen turned to me. The calm, controlled mask was gone. In its place was a raw... He stared at me for a long, long moment, conflict raging in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of old, forbidden knowledge. There are legends, old tales from before the Great Howling, from a time when magic was thicker in the world, stories of bloodlines created as counterweights, humans altered by ancient pacts or desperate magic. He took a breath. They were called Nulls. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said it made my soul freeze. "What happened to them?" I asked, his gaze holding mine, unflinching. "They were hunted," he said, his gaze holding mine, unflinching. "Hunted to extinction, because they could do something no other creature could. They could dampen wolf essence, disrupt pack bonds, neutralize the very power that makes us who we are." He stepped so close his heat surrounded me. If that is what you are, if even a rumor of it spreads, every alpha in every territory will see you not as a person, but as a blight to be erased. The truth was a cage closing around me. I wasn't just a servant who saw too much. I was a relic of a forgotten war, a living weapon, a target. I never asked for this, I breathed, the world spinning. No one asks for the blood in their veins, Kalen said, his voice softening marginally. But we are responsible for it nonetheless. He reached out, slowly, giving me every chance to recoil. When I didn't, his fingers brushed my cheek. The spark, the silence. It flared, stronger now, a palpable quiet in the space where his skin met mine. He shuddered, a full-bodied tremor. There, do you feel that? Yes, I whispered. It's like stillness. My wolf is always there, he murmured, his thumb tracing my cheekbone, his expression of awe and dread. But when I touch you, it goes quiet, not gone, muted. His eyes searched my face. Does it hurt you? No. The word was a sigh. It feels like the eye of a storm. Everything is chaos, but right here, there's calm. We stood frozen in that impossible calm, his hand on my face, the truth a fragile, terrifying thing between us. This is dangerous, he murmured, but he didn't pull away. Everything since I picked up that decanter has been dangerous. I meant this. His other hand came up, framing my face. You are either my salvation, Alara, or my destruction, and right now I cannot tell which. Maybe I am both, I whispered, the words tasting of fate. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. The warmth of his breath ghosted over my lips. If I keep you close to find the traitor, the pack will revolt. If I let you go, the assassins will find you, and if what you are becomes known, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. So tell me, Alpha King, I said, my voice trembling only slightly, what am I worth to you? A tool, a weapon, or just a problem waiting to be solved? His grip tightened, his expression turning fierce, protective. I don't know yet, he said, his voice raw with honesty, but I'm going to find out. He released me abruptly, stepping back as if from a flame. You'll stay here, under guard. Tomorrow, we start hunting the traitor, and we start unraveling exactly what you are. He moved to the door, then paused, looking back. His face was all hard lines and alpha resolve. And Alara, do not try to run. If you do, I won't be the one who finds you first. Silas will, or Jax, and they will not ask questions before they end you. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the tower with the echo of his warning and the terrifying, silent truth of my own blood. Outside the window, the moon was a cold, watchful eye, and somewhere in Blackstone Keep, a traitor smiled, their plan unfolding perfectly. The null was revealed, the pack was divided, and the king was compromised. The real game was just beginning. The silence after Kalen left was a living thing. It pressed against my ears, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind through the tower windows. I was a null. The word echoed in the hollow spaces of my mind, a foreign label that felt both terrifying and strangely fitting. A zero, a void where wolf power could not reach. My whole life I had felt like a ghost among them. Now I knew why. I didn't sleep. I watched the moon trace its path across the sky, my mind racing over a cliff of impossible truths. My mother's secretive pain, her desperate lessons, they were not just about survival. They were about hiding what I was. She had died protecting this secret, and I had revealed it in front of the entire pack and a visiting alpha in a single defiant moment. Dawn bled into the sky, staining the mountains in hues of blood and gold. The door to the tower chamber opened and Kalen entered. He looked as if he hadn't slept either, shadows like bruises under his eyes, but his gaze was clear, sharp, and focused. "We have 3 days," he said without preamble, his voice gravelly with fatigue. He carried a bundle of dark cloth which he tossed onto a chair. "Silas has called a formal council of alphas. He is demanding your status be put to a binding vote." The ice that had been creeping through my veins since the night before solidified. A vote? He is alpha of the Frostfang pack, second only to Ironclaw in strength and territory. Kalen moved to his desk, shuffling through maps. "If he convinces half the council that you are a species-level threat, pack law will force my hand. Even an alpha king cannot override a majority council vote on matters of existential security." "Existential security," I repeated, the cold, clinical term. "That's what I am now?" "You are a null," Kalen corrected, his eyes meeting mine. There was no disgust in them, only a relentless, factual intensity. "A being of legend that can neutralize the very essence of what we are. Your existence, Alara, challenges every foundation of pack hierarchy. Silas knows this. He will use their fear like a weapon." "So I'm already dead," I whispered, the truth settling like a stone in my gut. "No." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping before me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a wall of conviction. "You were going to speak before the council. You were going to tell them the truth, not as a monster, but as the woman who saved their king from a traitor's poison. And they will kill me for that truth? Perhaps." His jaw tightened. "Or perhaps seeing you as a person, as a victim of the same plot, will make them hesitate. It'll buy us time to find the real assassin." "Us?" The word slipped out, fragile and hopeful. A flicker of something passed through his stormy eyes, an acknowledgement of the alliance forced upon us. "You have the knowledge. I have the authority. Together we find the wolf who tried to kill me and framed your mother. It's our only path forward." He gestured to the bundle. "Change into those. We begin now." The clothes were simple but sturdy. Dark trousers, a soft wool tunic, and a leather vest. They were not servants' rags. They were the clothes of someone who needed to move, to work. When I emerged from behind a changing screen, Kalen was waiting by the door. "Our first move," he said, leading me out into the corridor where 2 of Rorik's most trusted warriors stood guard, "is the wine cellar." The undercroft of Blackstone Keep was a labyrinth of stone and shadow, cool and smelling of earth and old oak. The royal wine cellar was a vault within the vault, its iron door bearing the Blackwood crest. Kalen produced a heavy key. "Only 3 people have a key to this door," he said, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. "Myself, Beta Jax, and Warlord Rorik." He pushed the door open. Inside, rack upon rack of bottles and casks receded into darkness. On a central stone table sat 3 empty decanters, crystal and silver, gleaming in the light of his lantern. One lay on its side, its stopper nearby. "That's the one," I said, pointing. "The 3rd one. It was set apart." Kalen nodded grimly. "A trap within a trap. The poisoner knew my habits, knew I would reach for the decanter poured last, believing it the freshest." He picked it up, holding it to the light. "No scent remains. It's been cleansed. But the method tells us something. They needed access, but they also needed knowledge, intimate knowledge of me." He began a meticulous search of the small room, his movements efficient. I watched him, this king of wolves in a dusty cellar, looking for the ghost of his own murder. He was different down here, less of the untouchable monarch, more of a hunter on a trail. The raw power was still there, but it was focused, like a blade drawn to a single point. "Help me," he said, not looking up from where he was examining the flagstones near the table. "Your eyes are trained to see what doesn't belong. Look for anything. A thread, a smear, a scent that is out of place." I moved to the opposite side of the room, my senses stretching. I pushed past the overwhelming odors of wine and wood. I sought the bitter, metallic undertone I'd tasted in the poison. I knelt, my fingers brushing the cold stone. And then I saw it, a tiny, almost invisible spatter on the leg of the stone table, dark brown, nearly black, dried. "Here," I called softly. Kalen was at my side in an instant. He crouched, dipping a finger and bringing it to his nose. His expression darkened. Not wine, something thicker, herbal. This is where it was mixed. His eyes scanned the floor around it. They were careful, very careful, but rushed. He pointed to a faint scuff mark on the stone. Someone stood here, in shadow, and prepared the decanter just before the feast. "The traitor was in this room," I breathed. "One of your 3 key holders." "Or someone they let in," Kalen amended, but the doubt was there. The trust was broken. He stood, a new resolve hardening his features. "The binder, you said you identified cedar ash and iron filings. That combination is rare. It comes from only one place in the Northern Territories, the forges of Mount Cinder, where the clans smelt their war steel and brew their most potent toxins." My mind made the connection instantly. Jax, he traveled north for border reconnaissance 3 weeks ago. Rorik hasn't left the territory in months. Kalen's face was a mask of stone, but a storm brewed in his eyes. "It is a thread, but it is not a rope. We need more." He looked at me. "Your mother's quarters. We need to search them ourselves before Jax or anyone else finds more convenient evidence." The servants' wing was a world away from the tower, low-ceilinged, dim, smelling of lye soap and hard work. My mother's old room was a tiny cell, barely larger than the cot it held. It had been cleared out after her death, but a trunk remained at the foot of the bed. A sense of profound sadness washed over me as we entered. This is where her light had faded. Kalen seemed to sense my grief. He did not speak, simply giving me a moment before he lifted the trunk's lid. It was mostly empty. A spare dress, a hairbrush, a small wooden box. I kicked up the box, my heart aching. Inside were a few trinkets, a smooth river stone, a faded ribbon, a locket that held a tiny, blurred portrait of my father, who had died before I could remember. She kept her life small, to draw no attention. Kalen was examining the trunk itself, running his hands along the interior. "A false bottom," he murmured. With careful pressure, a thin panel of wood popped up. Beneath it lay a single, folded piece of parchment. It was not a letter. It was a list. Names, dates, and beside them, symptoms. Blackthorn extract, paralysis in limbs, onset 20 minutes. Frost lichen powder, slowed heartbeat, hypothermia. Wolfsbane, number 3, Cinderforge blend. Cardiac arrest, mimics natural failure. Binder, cedar ash and iron filings. Antidote, none known. My breath caught. Her research, this is what they forced her to do. Kalen took the parchment, his eyes scanning the damning information. This is a log of her torture and a record of the Northern clan's poison arsenal. He pointed to the last entry. "This is the one, the Cinderforge blend. The binder confirms it." He looked at me, a fierce respect in his gaze. She wasn't just surviving Alara, she was documenting, gathering intelligence even as they broke her. The revelation was a bittersweet lance through my heart. My mother, in her silent, suffering way, had been fighting back. "This is our proof," Kalen said, folding the parchment carefully. "Proof that she was a prisoner of their research, not a collaborator. This wasn't planted, this was hidden." As he spoke, a noise in the corridor, a faint scuff of a boot. The tiny room seemed to shrink further with Rorik in it. His presence was a solid, immovable fact, a wall of scarred muscle and quiet intensity. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was he the traitor? Had he followed us? Was this where it ended, in my mother's barren room? Kalen did not move from his protective stance in front of me. His hand, I noticed, had drifted casually to rest near the hilt of the knife at his belt. The silence stretched, thick and charged as the air before lightning strikes. "Rorik," Kalen said finally, his voice devoid of warmth or hostility, simply a statement. The warlord's gaze shifted from Kalen to the parchment in his hand, then to my face. He did not look guilty. He looked weary and resolved. "I know about the list," Rorik said, his gravelly voice barely above a whisper. He pushed the door closed behind him, sealing us in the dim cell. "I've known about it for weeks." Kalen went very still. "Explain." "After Isolde died," Rorik began, his eyes growing distant, "I was tasked with clearing her effects, standard procedure. I found that hidden compartment. I read what was in it." He met Kalen's gaze, his own eyes fierce with a hard loyalty. "I saw what it was, a record of unspeakable cruelty, and a blueprint of our enemy's capabilities. I knew if I brought it to you openly, it would be seen as evidence against her, and by extension, her daughter. The pack was already uneasy. Jax was already whispering." "So you hid it," Kalen stated, his tone unreadable. "I buried it," Rorik corrected. "I thought it was safest lost to time. I never imagined the very poison described on that parchment would appear in your cup." He shook his head, a gesture of profound frustration. "And I never imagined the girl would have the courage or the ability to stop it." He looked directly at me then, and for the first time, I saw not the dismissive warrior, but a man assessing another soldier. "When you spilled that wine, I thought you were a fool, a dead fool. But then the king lived, and Silas arrived with his poisoned words, and Jax—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Jax has been spending too much time in the archives, asking too many questions about old legends, about bloodline dampeners and wolf curses. He is building a case, my king, not just against her, but against your judgment." The pieces shifted, realigning into a new, more terrifying picture. Jax, the loyal beta, was not just overzealous, he was actively constructing a narrative of corruption and weakness around Kalen, using me as the centerpiece. "Why come to us now?" I asked, my voice small in the confined space. "Because the game has changed," Rorik said, turning his attention back to Kalen. "Silas's council is in 3 days. Jax will use it to make his move. He will call for her execution and challenge your fitness to rule if you refuse. He has gathered supporters, wolves who fear what they don't understand." He nodded at the parchment. "That list is no longer just proof of Isolde's suffering. It is proof that the Cinderforge poison exists, and Jax was the only one who traveled to the north recently. It links him to the crime, not just to the evidence." Kalen absorbed this, his mind working behind those storm cloud eyes. "You believe Jax is the traitor?" "I believe the wolf who howls loudest about the fire is often the one holding the torch," Rorik said grimly. "But belief is not proof. We need irrefutable evidence, something that ties him directly to placing the poison in that decanter." "The cellar," I thought out loud. "The scuff mark, the spill. If we could find something there that belongs to him, a thread from his tunic, a unique scent." "He will have been careful," Rorik said. "He is many things, but he is not a fool." "Then we make him careless," Kalen said, a dangerous glint entering his eyes. He looked at Rorik. "You will continue as you have, show no change in loyalty to me, agree with his concerns about the human problem, feed his confidence." Rorik's expression was pained, but he gave a sharp nod. I can do that. And you, Kaelin turned to me, you will become visible, not hiding in the tower. You will walk the lower halls with me. You will be seen examining the feast hall, the cellar entrance. We will let it be known you are helping the king's investigation. I understood immediately. We make me the bait. We make Jax nervous. If he thinks I'm getting close, he might make a mistake, or he might try to silence me himself. Kaelin's gaze held mine, and in its depths I saw a flicker of reluctant admiration for the quickness of my mind, and a shadow of fear for the risk. Exactly, but you will be with me or with Rorik at all times. No exceptions. It was a plan forged from desperation and thin threads of trust. Rorik, the gruff warlord, was risking everything by confessing his secret. Kaelin was staking his authority on the word of a human and the loyalty of a soldier, and I was walking into the open, a target painted on my back. The next 2 days passed in a tense, deliberate performance. Kaelin and I became a strange, inseparable pair. He, the brooding Alpha King, moving through his keep with purpose. I, the silent, watchful human, a step behind him, my eyes constantly scanning, my senses stretched to their limit. We visited the great hall in the cold light of day. I knelt where the decanter had shattered, pretending to search for clues, while feeling the hostile stares of wolves like physical blows. We walked the route from the kitchens to the high table, timing it, looking for blind spots. Whispers followed us everywhere. The king is bewitched. The Nullblood spies for the clans. Beta Jax says it's only a matter of time. Jax himself watched us like a hawk from the shadows, his amber eyes burning with a mixture of fury and calculation. He played his part perfectly, approaching Kaelin with shows of concerned loyalty. "My king, this is unseemly. The pack murmurs. They see you trusting a human over your own beta. It weakens you." "What weakens me, Jax," Kaelin replied, his voice like polished steel, "is a traitor in my house. Until that wolf is found, I will use every tool at my disposal, even an unusual one." The barb struck home. Jax's smile was tight, dangerous. "Of course, vigilance is a virtue. I only hope your tool does not turn in your hand." The pressure was a constant, suffocating weight, but within it, something else was growing, a fragile, wordless understanding between Kaelin and me. During our long hours of silent investigation, he began to explain things: pact politics, the history of the northern clans, the significance of territorial markers. He spoke to me not as a servant or a weapon, but as an intelligent being who needed to understand the battlefield. In return, I shared fragments of my mother's teachings, the subtle signs of different toxins, the way that fear and power could be just as poisonous as any herb. We did not touch. The strange, quieting spark between us remained a wary, unspoken boundary. But a different kind of connection was forming, one built on shared purpose and mutual, grudging respect. On the evening of the second day, as we returned to the tower, the trap finally sprung, not on Jax, but on us. A young page, breathless and pale, intercepted us at the foot of the tower stairs. "My king, a rider from the Frostfang border. He bears an urgent message from Alpha Silas's camp." Kaelin took the sealed scroll. He broke the wax, a sigil of a jagged icicle, and read. His expression darkened with every line. "What is it?" I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. "Silas has moved the council," he said, his voice flat and cold. "It is not in 3 days. It is tomorrow at dawn, and he has invoked the right of the accused." He looked at me, and in his eyes I saw genuine alarm. "You will be brought before the assembled alphas not as a witness, but as a defendant, and the trial, a test of your claimed abilities, a test designed by Silas." The world tilted. What kind of test?
Kalen crumpled the parchment in his fist. He doesn't say, but Silas does nothing without purpose. He has seen your resistance to poison. He will not repeat that mistake. He will test something else. Something that will prove once and for all that you are the null of legend. He looked toward the darkening windows, his profile etched with grim determination. We have one night to find proof that will shift the council's gaze from you to the real enemy. One night. The hunter and the ghost had run out of time. The wolf was at the door, and he was not howling. He was smiling.
One night. The words were a death knell echoing in the stone silence of the tower. The fire Kalen had lit upon our return did little to dispel the chill that had taken root in my bones. The right of the accused. I knew of it only from fearful whispers among the servants, an ancient, brutal practice reserved for those accused of witchcraft or bloodline corruption. It was not a trial of facts, but of essence. A suspect was subjected to the very thing they were accused of wielding. In my case, that meant a public, orchestrated demonstration of my nullifying power. Silas didn't want to prove I could be a null. He wanted to make a spectacle of it. To make the other alphas see the monster, so their fear would dictate their verdict. Kalen stood before the fire, the scroll from Silas now a blackened curl in the flames. "We cannot run," he said, voicing the thought I hadn't dared to form. "The moment we flee, we confirm every accusation. The pack would fracture, Jax would seize control, and Silas would have carte blanche to hunt you across the territories. So we stay, and I face his test." My voice sounded hollow, even to me. "We find Jax's proof tonight," Kalen countered, turning to face me. The firelight carved shadows into the sharp planes of his face. "If we can present the council with the real traitor, a beta who tried to murder his king and frame an innocent to seize power, the focus shifts. Your abilities become secondary, a curiosity, perhaps, but not the primary threat." "How?" I spread my hands, a gesture of hopelessness. "We've searched. Rorik is watching him. He's been careful. He won't lead us to a hidden vial of poison or a signed confession." "Then we don't look for what he's hidden," Kalen said, a predatory gleam entering his eyes. "We look for what he's lost, or what he cannot hide." He began to pace, a restless energy coming off him in waves. The poison was Cinder Forge blend. The binder links it to the north. Jax traveled north, but he would not bring the raw poison back through the gates. He would have acquired the recipe, the ingredients. He'd need to source them locally. I followed his train of thought, a spark of desperate hope igniting. Wolfsbane grows in the high valleys, nightshade in the forest shadows, but shadow roots and the precise cedar ash and iron mix are not naturally occurring here, Kalen finished. He would have a supplier, or a stash, a place where he blends it. He stopped pacing, his gaze locking onto mine. "Your quarters have been searched, discreetly. Nothing. But Jax is a creature of habit and pride. He would not keep such dirty work in his own den. He would have a secondary location, a place of solitude or of power." An idea, fragile and terrifying, bloomed in my mind. The Sentinel's perch. Kalen went utterly still. The perch was a narrow, isolated lookout tower on the keep's outermost wall, accessible only by a single exposed stair. It was where Jax, as Beta, often stood his solitary watches, brooding over the territory. "It's a place of duty," murmured Kalen, "above suspicion and private." If he were mixing a poison there, the stone might hold a residue, I thought, of my mother's lessons. Potent herbs, once ground, leave a scent in porous rock that lingers for weeks, a scent most wolves might miss in the wind, but a human trained by a poison master might not. Kalen finished. He nodded once, decisively. "Then that is where we go, now." It was a mad risk, slipping out of the king's tower in the dead of night to skulk to a remote watchtower. If we were caught, it would look like conspiracy or flight, but the clock had run out. Madness was our only option. We moved like shadows through the sleeping keep. Kalen knew every guard's rotation, every creaking floorboard. His hand, when it occasionally brushed my arm to guide me into an alcove, was a brand of heat in the cool dark. The strange, quieting sensation was a constant low hum between us, a secret signal only we could feel. The night air on the battlements was biting, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. The sentinel's perch was a dark finger of stone against the star-strewn sky. The single door at the base of the tower was barred from the inside during watches, but now stood slightly ajar. Kalen put a finger to his lips, his entire body coiling with readiness. He eased the door open, and we slipped into the cold, cylindrical space. A narrow spiral staircase wound upwards into darkness. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of old wolf, leather, and cold stone. We ascended silently. The room at the top was small, circular, open to the elements on one side through a large arch. A simple stool, a fur blanket, and a small locked chest were the only furnishings. A brazier stood cold and empty. My eyes adjusted to the moonlight streaming through the arch. I moved immediately to the stone ledge that served as a table beside the stool. I knelt, ignoring the cold seeping through my trousers, and brought my face close to the rough-hewn rock. I closed my eyes, shutting out the world, and inhaled deeply. I filtered past the scent of old smoke and wolf, past the mineral scent of granite. I sought the bitter, the acrid, the out of place. And I found it. A faint, ghostly taint. Wolfsbane, yes, but also the sharp, almost coppery tang of refined iron dust and the dry, aromatic whisper of cedar ash. It was incredibly faint, weathered by wind and time, but it was there. A memory of murder ground into stone. Here, I breathed, pointing to a slight indentation in the ledge. This is where he used a mortar. The residues are embedded, faint but present. Kalen crouched beside me, his own keen nose flaring. After a long moment, he grimaced, too faint for me to swear to in a council of alphas. My word against his. He would claim it's from old weapon maintenance. It's not enough. Despair threatened to swallow me. We had found the place, but the evidence was a whisper, not a shout. My eyes fell on the small, iron-bound chest. It was the only thing in the room that could conceal something. The chest. Kalen examined the heavy lock. It's warded. A simple pick would trigger a mechanism. It would scream betrayal. I studied the chest, then the ledge. The faint residues led right to its edge. My fingers traced the seam where the lid met the body. There was no gap, not even the width of a hair. But at the back, near the bottom, the stone floor was slightly uneven. I pressed my cheek to the cold stone, looking at the chest's underside. There, caught on a tiny, rough splinter of iron on the chest's base, was a thread. A single, short thread of dark green wool, the color of the beta's ceremonial garments. "Kalen," I whispered, my heart leaping. "Look!" He bent, his eyes sharpening. Carefully, using the very tip of his knife, he teased the thread free. He held it up to the moonlight. It was unmistakable. The unique mossy dye used only for the beta's ceremonial garments. "This places him here," Kalen murmured, a fierce triumph in his voice. "But not with the poison. We need the link." I stood, frustration a bitter taste in my mouth. My gaze swept the room again, stopping at the empty brazier. It was clean, too clean. A thought struck me, absurd but desperate. "The ash," I said, moving toward it. "If he used the brazier to burn something, to destroy evidence?" Kalen was beside me in an instant. He carefully tipped the brazier. A small pile of cold gray ash and a few unburned fragments spilled onto the floor. I sifted through it with a stick from the stool. Most was just wood ash, but then I found it. A tiny, curled fragment, blackened at the edges but still recognizable. It was a piece of parchment, and on it, in a precise, sharp script that was not my mother's flowing hand, were the remains of words, "And delivery must coincide with the victory toast. The Cinderforge blend is undetectable once." The rest was burned away. But it was enough. It was a direct instruction, a recipe fragment. Kalen took the fragile black scrap as if it were a holy relic. This is his handwriting. His voice was thick with a terrible, betrayed certainty. I've seen it on 1,000 patrol reports. This is Jax's hand, discussing the poison and its delivery. We had it. The thread placed him at the scene. The parchment tied him to the plot. It was fragile, circumstantial to some, but to an alpha king who knew his beta, it was a damning constellation of truth. A sound from below. The softest scrape of a boot on stone. Kalen's head snapped up. He pushed me behind him, towards the deepest shadow in the curve of the wall opposite the arch. He drew his knife, the steel glinting dully. The footsteps paused just below the trap door leading into the room. Then, the door began to lift. Moonlight outlined a figure, broad shoulders, a familiar, arrogant posture. Beta Jax stood in the doorway, his yellow eyes gleaming as they adjusted to the gloom. They swept the room, passing over our shadow, then snapped back. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. "My king," he said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. "And the little null. Fancy finding you here, in my watchtower." His gaze dropped to the disturbed brazier, the ash on the floor. The smile didn't waver, but his eyes turned chips of frozen amber. "Looking for something?" The air in the tower room turned to ice. Jax filled the doorway, a solid, menacing blockade between us and the only exit. The wind whistled through the open arch, a lonely sound that underscored our isolation. Kalen didn't lower his knife. He didn't move from his protective stance in front of me. His voice, when he spoke, was calm, colder than the mountain wind. "We found what we were looking for, Jax. The question is, what are you doing here?" Jax took a slow, deliberate step into the room, his movements relaxed, almost lazy, the confidence of a wolf who believes he has already won. "This is my watch post. I often come here to think, to clear my head of the complications that have infested our pack." His eyes, glittering with malice, landed on me. "I could ask you the same, my king. Skulking in the dark with the creature, it does not inspire confidence in your leadership." "Leadership is not about inspiration," Kalen said, his tone slicing through Jax's pompous words. "It is about truth, and the truth is in the ash on this floor, and on the thread caught on your chest." Jax's facade faltered for a fraction of a second. His gaze flicked to the brazier, then back. He hadn't known about the thread. Ash and thread, the desperate scraps of a king clutching at shadows to protect his pet monster. The council will laugh you out of the circle. "The council will see a traitor," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could think. The fear was a knot in my throat, but a hotter, sharper anger burned beneath it. Anger at this wolf who had twisted my mother's suffering, who had tried to kill a king and plunge thousands into war. The sea will see the beta who traveled north, who acquired the Cinderforge recipe, who ground wolfsbane and shatterroot on this very stone, and who placed death in his king's cup. Jax's facade of amused detachment shattered. His lips peeled back from his teeth in a silent snarl. "You dare? A human stain dares to accuse me?" He took another step forward, his power beginning to bleed into the room, a suffocating, aggressive pressure. "You have no voice here. You are a mistake that should have been corrected the moment you were born." "She has my voice," Kalen whirled, and his own power rose to meet Jax's, a clash of wills that made the very air vibrate. It was a storm front meeting a wildfire. "The initials were purged for a reason," Jax continued, his voice dropping to a fervent, desperate whisper. "They are anathema. They are the great unmaking. I didn't try to kill you for power, you fool. I tried to save you, to save all of us from the corruption you are so eagerly embracing." The revelation was staggering. It reframed everything. This wasn't a simple coup. It was a holy war in Jax's mind, a crusade. "You poisoned me to save me," Kalen said, the words dripping with icy disbelief. "To force a crisis, to see the threat before it was too late. But you didn't see. You protected it. You are infected, and now Silas sees it. The council will see it. They will cleanse this blight, and if you stand in the way, they will cleanse you as well." Jax's hand went to the hilt of his own knife. "I offered you a clean death by poison, a king's death. Now you will die as a heretic to your own kind, defending an abomination." The time for words was over. Jax moved with the speed of a striking serpent, but Kalen was faster. He didn't meet the charge. He shoved me hard toward the stone archway, putting the bulk of the central pillar between me and the fight. "Stay down," he roared, and then he was a blur of motion. The clash was terrifying. It was not the grand shifting battle of the challenge ring. This was close quarters, brutal and silent, save for the grunts of effort, the scrape of steel on steel, and the sickening thud of flesh impacting stone. They were too evenly matched in skill, but Kalen had the edge of righteous fury, and Jax had the manic strength of fanaticism. I crouched behind the pillar, peering around its edge. My heart was a trapped bird beating against my ribs. I was useless, a human in a fight of wolves. The pouch with our evidence was on Kalen's belt. If he fell, it was lost. Everything was lost. Jax fainted low and swept a leg, aiming to knock Kalen into the open archway. Kalen twisted, but his boots skidded on the scattered ash. He stumbled, going down on one knee. Jax lunged, his knife aiming for Kalen's throat. Without thinking, I moved. I didn't charge. I didn't scream. I simply stepped out from behind the pillar and reached out, my hand closing, not on Jax, but on Kalen's shoulder where he knelt. The moment my fingers made contact, the nullifying spark erupted. It wasn't a gentle quieting this time. It was a shockwave of pure negation. A sphere of utter deafening silence exploded outwards from the point of our contact. Jax, mid-lunge, recoiled as if struck by a physical force. He didn't just stumble, he convulsed. A guttural pain sound was torn from his throat. His wolf, the essence of his power and aggression, was violently suppressed. For 2, maybe 3 seconds, he was not a dominant beta. He was just a man, confused, disoriented, his instincts screaming in wrongness. It was all the opening Kalen needed. He surged up from his knee, his own knife flashing in the moonlight. He didn't strike to kill. He struck to disarm, to dominate. The flat of his blade slammed against Jax's wrist, sending the beta's knife clattering across the stone. In the same motion, Kalen's fist connected with Jax's jaw with a crack that echoed in the sudden return of sound. Jax crumpled, hitting the floor hard, dazed. Kalen stood over him, breathing heavily, his knife now at Jax's throat. His eyes met mine over the fallen beta. In them, I saw shock at the power of what had just happened, a flicker of primal unease, and overwhelming, fierce gratitude. "Yield," Kalen commanded, his alpha will pouring into the word. Jax, beaten, betrayed by the very power he feared, glared up with unrepentant hatred. Blood trickled from his split lip. "Never. You are lost, Kalen. You have chosen the void over your own blood. The council will see. Silas will see." He spat blood on the floor. "I am the loyal one. I am the savior." "You are a traitor and a would-be kingslayer," Kalen said, his voice final. He straightened, keeping his knife ready. "Your confession is heard. Your plot is uncovered. You will face the council not as an accuser, but as the accused." He looked at me, then back at the stairs. "Rorik!" he shouted, his voice carrying on the wind. The sound of heavy boots pounding up the spiral stairs answered almost immediately. Rorik burst into the room, followed by 2 of his most trusted warriors. They took in the scene, the ash, the fallen beta, Kalen standing victorious, and me, pale and shaken by the pillar. "Take him," Kalen ordered, gesturing to Jax. "To the black cells. Shackle him with silver. He does not speak to anyone, not a soul." As the warriors hauled a cursing, struggling Jax to his feet, Rorik approached Kalen, his expression grimly satisfied. "You have the proof?" he asked. Kalen handed him the leather pouch. Thread from his tunic, caught at the seam, a burned fragment of his own hand detailing the plot,
and his confession, given freely, believing his cause just. He glanced at me, and we have a witness to all it. Rorik's gaze settled on me, and he gave a slow, respectful nod. It was more acknowledgement than I'd ever received from any wolf not named Kalen. "The council gathers at dawn," he said. "Will it be enough?" Kalen looked out the archway to where the first faint hint of gray was lightening the eastern horizon. "It will have to be. We have the truth. Now we must make them believe it over their own fear." He walked over to me. The frantic energy of the fight was leaving him, replaced by a deep, weary tension. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head, unable to speak. The aftermath of the nullifying burst was a strange, hollow feeling in my limbs, like an echo of the silence I had created. "What you did?" he began, his voice low. "That power—" "I didn't know I could do that," I whispered, staring at my own hand. "It saved my life," he said simply. The words were heavy with meaning. He didn't say it was scary or unnatural. He stated a fact. He offered a hand, not to help me up, but in a gesture of alliance. "Dawn comes. It is time to face the howling." I placed my hand in his. The spark was there, gentle now, a quiet hum of connection. This time, it didn't feel like a strange anomaly. It felt like a pact. The hunter and the ghost, side by side, walking out of the shadows and into the judgment of the pack. Dawn did not break so much as it bled across the sky, a slow seep of pale light that did nothing to warm the stone circle of the ancients. The circle was an open-air amphitheater carved into the living rock of a mountain's shoulder behind Blackstone Keep. It was a place of raw power, where the wind carried the whispers of generations of alphas. Today, it held only the cold scent of judgment. I stood beside Kalen at the mouth of the processional tunnel, looking out at the gathering storm. 12 stone thrones, hewn from the mountain itself, formed a semicircle. In 10 of them, the ruling alphas of the allied territories sat. They were a spectrum of power, massive gray-furred warriors from the Stonefall pack, lean, sharp-featured hunters from the Whispering Wood, the formidable silver-haired alpha Anya from the Western Crags. Their combined presence was a physical weight, a pressure that made my human bones feel frail as kindling. In the centermost throne, larger than the others, sat Alpha Silas. He looked carved from the same cold granite as his seat, his ash-pale hair pristine, his amber eyes watching our approach with the serene patience of a spider. To his right, the 11th throne, the seat of the Ironclaw Beta, stood empty, a glaring accusatory vacancy. A low rumble of conversation died as we stepped into the open circle. Hundreds of wolves from all packs lined the stepped stone benches, their eyes like hot coals in the gray light. I felt their gaze like a physical brand: curiosity, hatred, fear, and a voracious hunger for drama. I kept my chin up, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to hide their trembling. I was not dressed as a servant, nor a prisoner. I was simply Ilara. Kalen led me to the open space before the thrones. He did not bow. An Alpha King bowed to no one in this circle. He simply stopped and met Silas's gaze. "Alpha King Kalen, you answer the summons, and you bring the subject of this inquiry." "I bring Ilara," Kalen corrected, his voice ringing clear and hard off the stone. "The woman who saved my life and uncovered a traitor in my court." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silas's smile was a thin, cold curve. "A traitor you have yet to name, and a woman whose very nature is the reason for this council." He spread his hands, encompassing the other alphas. "We are not here to judge a servant's actions, but to determine if a legend has walked among us. The right of the accused has been invoked. The null blood must be tested." Alpha Anya leaned forward, her wise, weathered face severe. "The right is ancient and grave, Silas. It is not invoked for gossip or political games. What proof do you have of this legend beyond a human girl surviving a poison?" "Proof?"
Silas's eyebrow arched. We all witnessed her drink wolfsbane and nightshade and stand unharmed. We have the testimony of the late Beta Jax, who spoke of her corrupting influence. He paused, letting the mention of Jax hang in the air. But you are right, Anya. A single anomaly is not proof of myth. So the rite will provide clarity. His amber eyes pinned me. If she is human, she will fail, and her earlier survival will be deemed a trick, for which she will die. If she is what I suspect, the rite will reveal it for all to see. And what is the test? Kalen demanded, a growl entering his voice. Silas gestured to a warrior from his own Frostfang pack. The man stepped forward, carrying not a vial, but a length of dark braided leather. At its center was lodged a stone, a rough gray pulsing crystal that seemed to drink the dawnlight. I felt a wrongness from it, a deep vibrational nausea. This is a heartstone shard. A sharp intake of breath came from several alphas, minned from the depths under the howling caves. It resonates with the primal energy of the wolf, with pack bonds, with the shift, with our very essence. To a wolf, to any creature with that spark, its touch is uncomfortable, a constant grating hum. He looked directly at me. But to a true null, a creature born to cancel that essence, it should be inert, a cold rock. Or perhaps, his smile sharpened, it will react in a way we have never seen. The test was diabolical. It didn't test my body, but my soul, my nature. If I was just a resilient human, the stone's energy would agonize me, proving my humanity and my earlier survival a fluke. If I was null, my reaction, or lack thereof, would brand me before the entire wolf nation. She will not be subjected to this, Kalen said, stepping slightly in front of me. You cannot shield her from the right you agreed to by bringing her here, Kalen said, his tone chiding. To refuse is to admit guilt, to confirm the corruption. I do not refuse the test, I said. My voice sounded small in the vast space, but it did not shake. Every eye snapped at me. I will take it. Kalen turned his head, his eyes blazing a silent warning. I met his gaze and gave the slightest nod. We have a plan. Trust me. He hesitated then, with obvious reluctance, stepped aside. The Frostfang warrior approached. He held out the braided leather strap, the pulsing heartstone dangling like a malevolent pendulum. Grasp the stone, Silas instructed. Hold it until we see the truth. I reached out. My fingers closed over the crystal. Agony. It was not physical pain. It was worse. It was the sound of 1,000 wolves howling in discord inside my skull. It was the feeling of my bones trying to vibrate into dust. It was a scream of alien energy that sought the wolf spark in me, and finding none, tore through the void instead. I cried out, my knees buckling. The stone wasn't inert. It was reacting violently to the absence it detected. But within that torrent of wrongness, I felt my own power stir, not a gentle quieting, but a defensive, reflexive surge. The nullifying force within me rose like a wall, not to dampen a wolf, but to repel this invasive, resonant energy. A visible shock wave, silent but distorting the air like heat haze, erupted from my clenched fist. The heartstone's pulse stuttered, then changed. Its dull gray light flickered, dimmed, and then began to emit a soft, pearlescent white light, a cold, silent, empty light. I held on, gasping, tears of strain streaming down my face. The howling in my mind faded, replaced by that profound, hollow silence. In my hand, the heartstone was no longer a pulsing symbol of wolf essence. It was just a cool, quietly glowing rock. I opened my hand. The stone rested on my palm, glowing with that sterile, beautiful, dead light. The circle of the ancients was utterly, profoundly silent. The wind itself seemed to have died. Every alpha was on their feet, their expression a mask of shock, awe, and terror. Silas looked not triumphant, but deeply, personally disturbed. He had proven his point, and the reality of it was more frightening than the theory. "Behold," he whispered, the word carrying in the hush, the null, the unmaking given form. Before the terror could solidify into a verdict, Kalen moved. He stepped into the center, his voice a clarion call that shattered the stunned silence. "You have seen what she is. Now see what she has done." He turned, pointing back to the tunnel. "Rorik, bring forth the truth." Warlock Rorik emerged, not with weapons, but dragging a shackled, snarling Beta Jax. The crowd erupted in confusion. Rorik threw Jax to the stone floor at the foot of the Alpha Thrones. Then he held up the leather pouch and emptied its contents on the ground before Silas's seat. The green thread, the charred parchment fragment. This thread, Kalen's voice boomed, from the Beta's own garment found in the Sentinel's perch, where the Cinderforge poison was mixed. This parchment in his own hand, detailing the assassination of his Alpha, and his own confession given to me last night, not for power, but for a fanatical war against a legend he feared. He turned a slow circle, addressing every Alpha, every wolf in the stands. "Jax is the traitor, Ilara is a null. One tried to destroy us from within, the other," he looked at me, where I still stood, the silent, glowing heartstone in my hand, "saved my life, and by doing so, saved this alliance from a schemer's war. The question for this council is no longer what she is, it is whose side is she on." He had masterfully reframed the entire debate. He had taken my terrifying revelation and woven it into the narrative of his own salvation and the pack's survival. Alpha Anya stood. Her eyes, old and keen, studied me. Then Jax writhing on the ground. Then Silas's frozen face. "The king speaks true," she declared, her voice firm. "We came to judge a myth. We find ourselves in the middle of a treason. The Beta's guilt is plain. The human girl's nature is confirmed. But her actions speak of loyalty, not malice." Other Alphas began to nod, murmuring amongst themselves. The tide was turning, not towards acceptance of me, but towards a pragmatic need to deal with the immediate, proven traitor and the political earthquake Kalen had just unleashed. Silas saw his meticulously built momentum crumbling. His eyes, burning with cold amber fire, settled on me one last time. "This is not over, Unmaking," he said, the title a curse. "Your existence is a rift in the world, and rifts must be closed." He stood, addressing the council. "The Frostfang Pack withdraws from this proceeding. Our alliance with Ironclaw is under review. You keep your ghost, Kalen. See what fortune it brings you." With a swirl of his cloak, he descended from his throne and strode from the circle, his retinue following. His departure was a shock, a seismic crack in the unity of the territories. But he was gone. The immediate threat of execution by council was over. Kalen turned to the remaining Alphas. "Jax will be imprisoned for life for treason and attempted regicide. As for Ilara," he walked over to me. Gently, he pried the still glowing heartstone from my numb fingers and handed it back to a stunned Frostfang warrior. Then he faced the council. "She will remain under my protection, and she will use her unique abilities in service to this alliance, to identify poisons, to safeguard against the very treachery we witnessed, not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, as a trusted ally." It was a staggering offer, unprecedented. Alpha Anya looked at me for a long moment, then back at Kalen. A slow, approving smile touched her lips. "An ally with such gifts could be valuable indeed. The Western Crags acknowledge your judgment, Alpha King, and we will watch this alliance with great interest." One by one, the other Alphas gave their grudging, curious, or wary assent. The council was adjourned. The verdict was not innocence, but a stay of execution, a chance. As the circle began to empty, Kalen finally looked at me. The fierce, public mask fell away, leaving behind exhaustion and a dawning, cautious hope. The crowd's noise faded, leaving just the two of us in the vast, ancient stone bowl under the now bright sky.
"Well," he said quietly, a ghost of a smile touching his mouth, "you certainly know how to make an entrance." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, born of sheer relief and adrenaline. I swayed on my feet. The world, for a moment, went gray at the edges. His hand shot out, steadying my elbow. The spark was there, warm and quieting, a familiar anchor in the whirlwind. "Come on," he murmured, his voice for my ears only. "Let's go home." Home. The word, coming from him, about the stone keep that had been my prison and my salvation, felt like the first true promise of dawn after the longest night.
The victory in the circle of the ancients was brittle, a thin sheet of ice over deep, dark water. Silas's departure was not a retreat, it was a declaration of Cold War. The Frost-Fang territories bordered Ironclaw to the north and east. His withdrawal from the alliance wasn't just political, it was a strategic unraveling of a century of mutual defense pacts, trade routes, and shared patrols. Blackstone Keep, once the secure heart of the Allied territories, now felt like a fortress on a newly hostile frontier. In the days that followed, a tense new rhythm settled over the keep. Jax languished in the silver-lined cells deep below, his fanatical ravings echoing up the stone shafts. His exposed treachery had purged the pack of his most ardent followers, but a residue of unease remained. Wolves looked at me with a new, complicated expression, not just fear or hatred, but a wary, uncertain curiosity. I was the null, the unmaking, the king's strange ally. I was a walking question mark. Kalen moved with a grim, focused energy. Councils with his remaining loyal alphas, Anya of the Crags, Borin of Stonefall, and the others, lasted late into the night. Maps were redrawn, patrols were doubled along the Frostfang border. Rorik was now acting beta, his loyalty proven in fire, and he threw himself into the work of shoring up defenses with the grim satisfaction of a warrior given a clear enemy. And I had a purpose. Kalen had not made empty promises to the council. A small, sunlit chamber near the infirmary was cleared for me. It became my workshop, my library, my sanctuary. The healers, initially hesitant, began to bring me suspicious herbs found on patrol, strange berries, tainted water from border streams. Using my mother's notes and my own honed senses, I cataloged them. I identified a batch of mutton poisoned with drowsy root meant for the guards' mess. I confirmed that a gift of ale from a neutral clan was laced with a slow-acting liver toxin. I was useful, tangibly, measurably useful, and with each small victory, the wary looks from the wolves around me softened incrementally into something closer to respect. One afternoon, a week after the council, Kalen found me in the workshop. I was grinding a sample of suspicious moss between two stones, my nose close to detect any hidden scent. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me for a long moment. "You are adapting," he said, his voice pulling me from my focus. I sat back, wiping dusty hands on my apron. It's what I know. It's what my mother taught me, to see the poison in the world. He entered, picking up a labeled jar containing an innocuous-looking purple flower. "Night Veil. Causes paralysis and vivid nightmares." He set it down. "Your mother's notes are a darker mirror of our own healer's texts, a map of all the ways we can be broken." "It's a map of how to survive those who want to break you," I corrected softly. He nodded, accepting the distinction. He looked tired, the weight of kingship and impending conflict etching new lines beside his eyes. "Silas is moving. His scouts have been seen probing our border markers. He's recalling his traders from our markets. It's a quiet mobilization." "Will there be war?" The question was a cold stone in my stomach. "Not outright, not yet. He's too clever for that. He will try to isolate us, strangle our trade, lure away our weaker allies with whispers and promises. He will try to make Ironclaw seem like a liability, a kingdom led by a king who consorts with monsters." His gaze was frank, unflinching. "You are the center of his propaganda, Alara. You are his reason and his rallying cry." The familiar fear coiled in my gut. but a new, sharper feeling rose to meet it. Anger. So I hide? I go back to being a ghost? No. The word was decisive. You do the opposite. Anya of the Crags has invited a delegation of healers from 3 allied packs. They arrive in 2 days. She has asked if you would share your knowledge to help them identify Northern Clan toxins. It was an astonishing request, and Alpha was not just tolerating my existence, she was seeking out my skill. It was a public endorsement more powerful than any decree from Kaelin. Will I be safe? I asked, the memory of the Heartstone's agony and the sea of hostile faces still fresh. You will be under my protection and Anya's sworn oath, he said. But more than that, you will be seen, not as a spectacle, but as a scholar, as an asset. We must fight Silas's whispers with visible truth. He hesitated, then added, I will be there the entire time. The unspoken promise in his words warmed me more than the sunlight streaming through the window. Our connection, born in crisis, was deepening into something like partnership. We spoke less of poisons and politics in our private moments, and more of the territories, the beauty of the high glacial lakes, the strange singing caves of the Whispering Wood. He shared stories of his own childhood, of a father who was a stern strategist and a mother who loved botany. I, in turn, spoke of my village, of simple things lost to fire, the taste of wild honey, the way the morning mist hung in the valley. We never spoke of the spark, the quiet. It was simply there, a constant, comforting hum in the space between us when we were close. It was no longer a terrifying anomaly. It was our private language. The day of the healers' gathering arrived. The great hall was set not for feasting, but for learning. Long tables held samples, jars, and scrolls. Dozens of wolves, male and female, young and old, watched as I stood before them, Kaelin a solid, reassuring presence at the head table with Alpha Anya. My throat was dry as dust. These were not hostile warriors, but curious professionals, yet their attention was just as intimidating. I held up a sprig of wolfspine. The scent is bitter, like almonds and copper, but when mixed with shadow root, the copper note is masked by an earthy dampness like a forest floor after rain. You must learn to separate the layers. I lost myself in the teaching. In the familiar territory of scents and symptoms, my fear fell away. I showed them how to test for trace residues using simple chemical reactions my mother had devised. I explained how the Cinderforge binder, the cedar ash and iron, left a faint, gritty film that repelled water. The healers leaned forward, asking sharp, intelligent questions. They debated, they took notes. For a few hours, I was not the null. I was Alara, the expert. As the session ended, an older healer from the Stonefall pack approached me. Her hands were gnarled with age and work. She placed a small, leather-wrapped bundle in my hands. For your mother's memory, she said, her voice gruff. Yarrow, from the highest peak in our territory, the best for healing wounds of the spirit. She would be proud of you, girl. Tears pricked my eyes. It was the first unconditional kindness I'd received from a wolf not bound to Kaelin. It was a crack in the wall of fear, and through it a sliver of genuine acceptance shone. That night, the mood in the keep was lighter. The gathering had been a success, a small but tangible victory against Silas's campaign of isolation. Kaelin and I walked the quieter upper battlements after dusk, the tension of the day slowly uncoiling. You were remarkable today, he said, his voice quiet in the twilight. It was just what I know. It's what my mother taught me, to see the poison in the world. It is leadership, he corrected. You took a room full of wolves who feared you and gave them a tool to protect their packs. You turned fear into respect. He stopped, looking out over the darkening forests that were now his vulnerable border. Silas wants to paint you as a destroyer of our nature, but today you acted as a protector of our people. That is a story we can tell. That is the truth we must make louder than his lies. He turned to me, his face illuminated by the first stars. I must go to the border tomorrow. Rorik has reported increased Frostfang activity near the Silverflow River. I need to see it for myself. A cold dread, different from the fear of crowds or councils, clutched at my heart. The border was now a dangerous place. For how long? A few days, a week at most. He searched my face. You will be safe here. Rorik will be in command. The keep is loyal. It wasn't my safety I was worried about. The thought of him riding towards Silas's machinations without me there to sense a poison or just to be there to share the quiet, it left a hollow ache. Be careful, was all I could say, the words inadequate. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair the wind had loosened from my braid. The contact sent the familiar, warm silence shimmering through me. I will. His hand lingered for a moment, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. It was a touch that held a world of unspoken things. Trust, care, a promise to return. Keep my home safe while I'm gone. Then he was gone, striding back towards the keep, leaving me on the battlements with the wind, the stars, and the echo of his touch. The hunter was going to the frontier, and the ghost, for the first time, was left behind to guard the hearth and to wonder if the connection that had become her anchor was something far more profound than mere alliance. The week Kaelin was gone was the longest of my life. Blackstone Keep felt cavernous, empty of his anchoring presence. The silence in the corridors wasn't the peaceful quiet of order, but a tense, waiting hush. Rorik was a capable steward, a blunt, efficient force of nature, but he was not the king. The pack moved through its duties, but their eyes often strayed northward, towards the border and their absent alpha. I threw myself into my work. I cataloged the entire stock of the infirmary's herb stores, creating a clear guide for the healers. I tested every new supply shipment that came through the gates. I even began, tentatively, to train a young, sharp-nosed healer's apprentice named Lyra, who showed no fear of me, only a burning curiosity. It was grounding. It was necessary. But every sunset that stained the sky without sign of his return felt like a personal failure. Rumors, carried by swift riders and the fearful whispers of servants, seeped into the keep like a chill fog. Silas's wolves were not just prodding, they were building something, a fortified outpost on a disputed bend of the Silverflow River. They had intercepted 2 Ironclaw supply caravans, turning them back with courteous warnings about unstable roads. It was a campaign of quiet aggression, 1,000 small cuts meant to bleed Ironclaw's strength and prestige. On the 8th evening, as a cold rain lashed the battlements, the horns sounded, not the alarm of attack, but the long, clear notes of royal return. The entire keep seemed to exhale a breath held for days. I was in the workshop, grinding feverfew when the sound reached me. My heart leapt into my throat. I wiped my hands, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs, and moved not to the crowded main courtyard, but to a secluded archway overlooking the inner gate. I needed to see him arrive, but I couldn't bear the public spectacle. Through the sheeting rain, I saw them. A column of mud-spattered, weary warriors on tired horses. At their head, Kaelin. Even at a distance, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the grim set of his jaw beneath his helmet. He was unharmed, but he looked hardened. The brief peace of our days before his departure had been scraped away by the bleak reality of the border. He dismounted, handing the reins to a stable boy, and was immediately surrounded by Rorik and his captains. Their conversation was urgent, heads close together. I saw Kaelin nod sharply, his expression growing even grimmer. Then, as if sensing my gaze from across the rain-sticked archway, he looked up. His eyes found mine in the shadowed archway. The intensity of that connection, even across the distance, was a physical shock. The grimness on his face didn't soften, but his gaze held mine for a long, telling moment. An unspoken message of return, of shared burden. Then he turned back to his men, the moment broken. He did not come to the tower that night. Council lasted until the small hours. I waited in the sitting room before the fire, a book unopened in my lap, listening to the distant murmur of voices from below. The relief of his safe return was now tangled with a new, anxious dread. What had he seen? What decisions were being made in the war room? It was near dawn when the door to the tower chamber finally opened. He entered alone, still wearing his travel-stained leathers, smelling of wet wool, horse, and cold stone. He looked exhausted to his very soul. He didn't speak at first. He went to the fire, holding his hands out to the heat, his back to me. The silence stretched, filled with the crackle of logs and the weight of unspoken news. "It's bad, isn't it?" I finally asked, my voice small in the quiet room. He let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Silas is not preparing for a war. He is already waging one, a cold, clever war. He's choking our trade, bribing our border clans with promises of Frostfang protection. He's built a garrison he calls a trading post right on the river, controlling the best crossing for 50 miles. He is isolating us, making us look weak and erratic because of you. And it's working." The old guilt, the crushing sense of being a burden, rose like bile. Then perhaps distance would— No. The word was a whip crack, final and absolute. He crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping before me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was overwhelming. He ran a hand through his rain-damp hair, frustration etching his face. "But I cannot ask my people to suffer for a principle. Their livelihoods are drying up. Their borders are being encroached upon. Silas offers them stability in exchange for surrendering a single aberrant soul." His stormy eyes met mine, filled with torment I understood all too well. It is a king's choice between one life and the welfare of thousands. The choice my mother had spoken of echoed on a royal scale. I stood, meeting his gaze squarely, my own resolve crystallizing in the face of his anguish. "Then we don't give him the choice he's offering," I said, my mind racing. "You said he's built a garrison on the river, that he controls the crossing. What does that garrison need?" Kalen frowned. "Supplies, food, weapons, fodder for their horses. They're far from their main territory." "And where do those supplies come from?" "From Frostfang, through the Blackwood Pass, and down the river valley. It's a long, vulnerable supply line, but we cannot touch it without triggering outright war." A plan, audacious and dangerous, began to form in my mind. It was not a warrior's plan. It was a ghost's plan. You don't need to touch the supplies. You just need to know what's in them, precisely. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by stark alarm. "Ella, no. You are not going anywhere near that garrison or that supply line. It's suicide." "I'm not going to fight," I said. A strange calm settled over me. This was my battlefield. I need to get to the river, upstream from their post. I need to see what comes down it. If I can identify what they're bringing, if there are poisons or specific herbs for their own healers or specialized tools, it tells us what they're planning. Are they stocking for a siege, for prolonged occupation, for chemical warfare? Knowledge is a weapon. You said it yourself. Let me get you that weapon." He stared at me, conflict warring in his expression. The king, who needed every advantage, battled with the man who could not bear me in such peril. "It is too great a risk. If you are captured, Silas would make a spectacle of you that would break the alliance forever." "Then I will not be captured." I stepped closer. The spark between us hummed, a steady current of connection. "Send Rorik with me, a small elite team. We go in, we observe, we come back. We are ghosts. It's what I'm good at." He was silent for a long time, his gaze tracing my face as if memorizing it. The fire popped and crackled. Finally, he exhaled, a sound of surrender to the inevitable. 3 days, a team of 5, including you and Rorik. You observe only. You do not engage. At the first sign of danger, you retreat. That is an order from your king." A flicker of a smile touched my lips. "Understood, Your Majesty." The next 72 hours were a blur of clandestine preparation. Rorik selected 3 of his best scouts, wolves who could move like mist and fight like demons. We pored over maps of the Silverflow Valley. I prepared small, potent packets of counteragents for common toxins. We were not an army, we were a needle meant to slip through the fabric of Silas's defenses and draw a single vital thread. The night we left, Kalen came to the small postern gate where we gathered. He spoke briefly with Rorik, his instructions low and grave. Then he turned to me. In front of the others, he could offer no embrace, no tender words. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder. The spark flared, warm and steady, a silent transfusion of his strength. "Come back," he said, his voice rough. 2 words that held the weight of a kingdom and something infinitely more personal. 3 days in the wild, cold forests north of Blackstone Keep were a lesson in focused terror. We moved by night, slept day in hidden dens. The land felt different, heavier, watchful. We saw Frostfang patrols in the distance, heard their horns echoing through the valleys. Rorik was a rock, his presence a steadying force. On the second night, we reached the bluffs overlooking the Silverflow. Below, the Frostfang garrison was a hive of torchlit activity, and on the river, moving like a dark water serpent, was a long supply barge being poled towards the dock. This was it. We waited until the dead of night, when the moon was obscured by clouds. Rorik and the scouts created a diversion half a mile downstream, raising a racket that sounded like a territorial animal clash. As the garrison's attention swung that way, I slipped down the bluff like a shadow, my senses stretched to their limit. I reached the edge of the water near the dock. The barge was moored, unattended. Using a hooked line, I pulled myself silently onto its deck. The hold was covered with a tarpaulin. I slit a small seam in the canvas and slipped inside. The smell hit me first. Grain, salted meat, iron, and beneath it the sharp, coppery scent of refined cinder ore and the dry, astringent smell of blight leaf, an herb used not for healing. Weeks later, peace had settled, not as a fragile truce, but as a hard-won, deep-rooted thing. The alliances were stronger, forged in the fire of a shared, narrow escape from catastrophe. On a bright, clear morning, Kalen found me in the gardens that were slowly greening with the new season. I was showing Lyra, the healer's apprentice, how to identify edible spring shoots from poisonous lookalikes. He watched for a moment, a softness in his expression I had never seen before. When Lyra scurried off with her basket, he approached. "Walk with me," he said. We walked beyond the gardens to a quiet hillside that overlooked the restored, sparkling line of the Silverflow and the valley below. The world was alive with birdsong and the scent of thawing earth. He stopped, turning to face me. The wind played with his dark hair. "It is done," he said simply. "The threat is past, the pack is secure, the alliances are firm." I nodded, a quiet happiness filling me. "It's a good day." "It is," he agreed. Then he took a deep breath, his storm-gray eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my heart stutter. "But my work is not finished. A king must look to the future, to the stability of his line, to the heart of his kingdom." He reached into the pouch at his belt and drew out not a document or a ring, but a simple, smooth river stone banded with gray and white. It was like the one my mother had kept. "Alara," he said, his voice low and solemn, yet warmer than the spring sun. "You have been my savior, my ally, my conscience, and my strength. You have stood where others would have fallen, and you have shown me that true power is not in dominance, but in the courage to protect what is right." He held out the stone. "This is not a command. It is a question, the most important question I will ever ask." He took my hand, placing the cool, smooth stone in my palm. His fingers closed over mine, the spark between us not a strange silence, but a harmony, a perfect, peaceful chord. "Will you stay, not as an ally or a protector or a ghost in the tower, but as my partner, as the heart of this kingdom beside its king? Will you build this future with me?" Tears blurred my vision, not of fear or pain, but of a joy so profound it felt like coming home after a lifetime lost. I looked from the stone in our joined hands to his face, to the open, hopeful, loving future shining in his eyes. I needed no grand words. The answer was in the spark, in the quiet, in the shared trials and the hard-won peace. It was in the man who saw not a null, but me. Yes, I whispered, the word a promise, a beginning, a vow. Yes, Kaylin, I will. His smile then was like the dawn after the longest night, brilliant, warm, and full of endless promise. He didn't kiss me, he simply rested his forehead against mine, our breaths mingling, the river stone a solid, enduring truth between our hearts. It was a sacred touch, a halal promise of a shared life, deeper and more binding than any ceremony. Together, we turned to look out over the kingdom we had saved, the territory that was now, truly and completely, our home. The hunter had found his heart, the ghost had found her place, and the story of the Alpha King and the girl who spilled his wine was just beginning.